want to talk for a few minutes about the idea that in English we would call the reasons for the commandments. The Hebrew term that is used is ta'amei hamitzvot. And the Hebrew word ta'am is an interesting word because in its most basic meaning, ta'am is a taste. Lit'om means to taste something. But at a deeper level, ta'am means a reason for something, the inner meaning of something. So when it says ein ta'am bezeh, you could say it's tasteless or there's no reason for it. And you'd only know in Hebrew from the context. Now, the idea of ta'amei hamitzvot, the reason for the commandments, is already very present in the Midrash and the Talmud because there is a premise among the minds of the rabbis all the way to this very day that mitzvot are understandable. The commandments from God, including all the words for commandments, we can understand them, especially the ones that have to do with morality, civil law, criminal law, etc. Other ritual commandments we can make sense of. For example, the commandment to keep the Sabbath. I think we can probably discuss and realize how meaningful and important it is for there to be a Sabbath day from the nobility all the way down to the workers. A person might say, I don't understand why we have to light candles on the evening of the Sabbath. We can probably explain that light is a natural symbol, and the lighting candles before the Sabbath is an act of sanctification. Why light? Again, I don't think that's too mysterious to a person who understands the idea of natural symbols, for example, light. There are other commandments, when the rabbis looked at them, they really did not understand. The meaning of the commandment was not obvious to them, so the ancient rabbis created a category of commandments that are simply decrees of God that don't have a ta'am, don't have an inner meaning. Some rabbis believe that. And they, without justification in my mind, use the Hebrew word chok, because the word chok can also refer to a civil law, a criminal law, and something moral. But they needed a word. So they took that word, and again, not entirely justifiably, but it's okay, that's the word that they use, to refer to those commandments that are decrees, they're commandments, but we can't find the reasons for them. Now, there were rabbis who objected to the idea that there's a category of commandments that don't have reasons. They said, it's not that they don't have reasons, it's we don't understand the reason yet. One group said, God actually intentionally gives commandments for no reason, just so that you'll obey. That is objectionable to me, but many Orthodox Jews believe it. We do it because it's a decree from God, and we don't have to understand it. It sounds like a parent. Just do it. You don't have to understand it. I'm in charge. So I don't like that kind of parenting, and I don't like that idea of God. Others say, for example, Maimonides would say that all commandments, the so-called ones we don't understand, are either there to shape us ethically. For example, the rules about eating, that you can eat this, you can't eat that. He says it's basically to help us not be gluttons. That if you already have in your mind that you see something, no matter how hungry you are, if you see pork or you see a cheeseburger, you just can't eat it. That helps a person say, there are just things I can't eat. And that would help a person not become gluttonous and not suffer the ill health ramifications of being severely overweight. This is right, Maimonides. Remember, he was also a physician. He said other commandments are there to help us not engage in the practices of the Canaanites. So sometimes when you don't understand a commandment, for example, not to cut the side locks, according to some biblical historians, one of the hairstyles of the Canaanites, what we would call the bowl cut. You put a bowl over someone's head and cut everything underneath. I had a version of that when I was in the military, and it was part of Canaanite culture to have the bowl cut, or the high and tight military haircut. And they didn't want Israelites to adopt the fashion of the Canaanites. So Maimonides says, sometimes if you don't understand something, you have to understand the cultural context. And I want to focus on that. Sometimes when you don't understand something in the Bible, it's because we haven't studied the cultural context of the commandment, and maybe we can't even recover the cultural context of the commandment. It doesn't mean it didn't have meaning in their time. It might just not have meaning in our time. I'll give you one example, the idea of mixing the fields. Many people don't understand why you can't have two different crops in the same field, and many laws of mixtures. Here's where symbolic anthropology really helped, especially the world of Mary Douglas. Mary Douglas is the essential reading for anybody who really wants to understand religion, especially her book, Nature and Symbols, which means the meaning of nature isn't contained in nature. Human beings use nature and use nature symbolically to express their own religious, spiritual, cultural concerns. Now, what she says in the book, if I'm not mistaken, that societies under pressure oftentimes create categories of purity against mixture. It seems it's a social, psychological expression of anxiety from pressure on the outside. When pressure on the outside goes down, people relax. When pressure on the outside goes up, some people become more strict. So she would say, if you look at all the laws against mixtures in the Bible, she says, hypothetically, it's a society under stress. Now, what does that mean for all of you? Here's three things I'll recommend. When you're studying the Bible and you get confused about something that you don't know the reason for, if it doesn't affect your life in a direct way, don't worry about it, study it later. Of course, we want it to be meaningful. Not everything will be meaningful. And if it doesn't affect how you love, you say, I'm just going to put a pin in that, and I'll look up Mary Douglas, and I'll look up biblical commentaries and see if I can find some wisdom about the mixtures. The second thing I want to say, if it's something that's meaningful for you, but you an area that's meaningful to you, but you object to it. For example, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, burning for a burning. People understand exactly what that means, but they say it's reprehensible. I know one person wrote, a society that lives by eye for an eye is going to end up with a lot of blind people. I agree with that, and the idea that if for some reason a person loses an eye, for some reason that you go out and pluck the other person's eye out, it has a kind of vengeance, justice feel to it, but I don't think we want to live by that. What the rabbis do, the rabbis also didn't like it. So they said eye for an eye means if someone blinds someone in one eye, the person pays compensation. So the rabbis already dealt with it. So if you say, I don't like an eye for an eye, well, the rabbis of the Talmud didn't like eye for an eye. And they created, again, the civil law of compensation. So in the Jewish tradition, I would say in the Christian tradition as well, this is based on our text, when you look at something that seems to be morally objectionable in the Bible, it's probably already been noticed, number one. And number two, the question is, are there people who actually operate that way? So there's what I call the revered canon, meaning I revere it because it's in the Torah, but is it operational in my life? So there are things that I'll look up later, things that I might object to, especially the ethical, moral side, and I have to figure out what the rabbis of the Talmud did and say, and in our days, just like the rabbis of the Talmud objected to things, we object to things. And then the question is, how much does this set of revered text actually operate in my life? And that's where we have to use our light of reason, our moral intuitions, our moral sensibilities, because remember, from my perspective and perspective of many rabbis, we're in conversation with our tradition. The tradition guides us, but sometimes we have to correct the tradition. Now, this might be an anathema to an Orthodox rabbi, but the rabbis of the Talmud do it as well. So always remember, reverence doesn't mean obedience. You can revere the tradition, but not obey some parts of it because it violates your own sense of reason and your own sense of morality. So if we don't understand something, there's a lot of work for us to do. Maybe we do understand, we just don't like it. And it's not right for us. So in the non-Orthodox tradition, we have that freedom to make the tradition meaningful, a tradition that if we revere it, I think is transformative, but we also never douse our lights of reason and